Hello, everyone. And I'm here for another Quorum Live. I'm Julie Livingston, and the Quorum Initiative has been doing this series of Quorum Live conversations with Quorum members and friends to really share our mission, which is to promote women's leadership and to give women the tools and confidence and resources so that they can climb the ladder and have a more direct pathway to the executive table. So we help women to create change at work. And we do that through a wonderful ongoing series of live events and Quorum Lives like this, as well as our speaker series. The Quorum Initiative is based in New York, but we have a number of chapters in Washington, D.C. Our newest chapter is in St. Joseph's, Missouri, and we have a very active chapter in London. I am delighted to welcome our guest today, Mary Messner. She is the board chair of the Madam President's Group. I'm sorry, she is the board chair of the Madam President Camp for Girls, and she is actually a member of our new St. Joseph's chapter in the Midwest. So welcome, Mary.
Thanks, Julie. Glad to be here.
So a little bit about her. Mary dedicates her career to approaching challenges with creativity. I love that. Refusing to accept the status quo and leading with a determination to grow others, including girls. Her keynotes inspire individuals and companies to create something unexpected, and her consultancy turns inspiration into action, becoming a creative partner on each unique journey. Mary believes that if we allow ourselves the freedom to be creative, the time and space, right, and the right mindset, we can find a path we never thought possible. We can make an impact for the better through our thoughts and actions. And by journeying together, we can do more and be stronger. Mary remains focused on celebrating other people's individuality and encouraging their authenticity. When she isn't growing her consulting business, she puts her energy into Madam President Camp, a nonprofit where that helps to nurture the next generation of women leaders, and spending time with their two young daughters. I'm sure you're giving them a lot of inspiration as well, Mary.
I sure try to. I hope so.
So tell us about Madam President Camp and how you came to be involved with the organization. I think it's such a fascinating concept, and I just love the name.
Yeah, there was a lot of effort put into that name. So it's actually been around for 10 years. We celebrated our 10th year of
Wow.
camps this past summer. And I've been with them for the last few years. My involvement started actually in 2020 when the camps couldn't occur. And the board was, like so many of us, were faced with that question of what do we do? And the board reached out, interestingly, to my mom, who had been an educational consultant in the greater Kansas City area for most of
Really?
her life. Yeah, so it was a really fun opportunity. She called me and said, "Do you want to work on a project with me?" I was
And that
in
must have hit home, given that you have two young daughters.
Yes, yes. And mine were 3 and 5. I remember those ages in 2020. It's like seared into my mind. But it was a cool opportunity to work with her. So she and I worked together to recreate the curriculum so that we could bring it to life in a virtual environment or an in-person setting or even in modules of education,
Hmm.
just not knowing what the future held. And
So
that
I just want to stop you
experience,
for 1 minute.
yeah,
Can you
please.
tell us a little bit about how the Madam President Camp originated?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our board members, our founding board members, Lee Smithson-Bird, she had a daughter who was in the middle school age, and her daughter said, "I want to go to camp, and I want to go to a camp where all my friends are." And it was a princess camp. And she went to this princess camp, and at the end, she learned how to bow and make a crown. And Lee said, "There has got to be something more than this. Why aren't we
My
teaching
God.
girls to stand behind a podium.
It
Why
seems
isn't
so
there,
old-fashioned, doesn't it?
doesn't it? Yeah, no, I understand the desire for a young girl to do a princess camp, but also that need to balance that with a different message. And so Lee did a lot of research and realized there is not a camp that she could send her daughter to that checked those boxes. So she reached out to a local Kansas City businesswoman, Pam Kelly, and Pam brought her years of experience being and working alongside strong female leaders. And they came up with the idea of this camp, Madam President Camp, that really pushes girls to focus on leadership. And I'll add one other important component there that really differentiates this, and that is the encouragement of civic engagement. So it isn't just enough to help these girls learn about leadership. What's really important is to show them and help them learn that they can do something with
They
those
can make a
leadership
difference for
skills.
other
They can make a
people
difference. Yes.
because that
Yes.
feels so good.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't, I think the big shift there, and from having an opportunity to work with this organization starting in 2020 and continue over the last several years, I've watched that shift in girls realizing that the circumstances of their world aren't just happening to them. They actually can play a role in changing the things that they see. And that, I mean, that's a message that we all need, particularly an 11, 12, or 13-year-old girl.
Oh my God. How I wish I had Madam President camp when I was a girl. Way back then, there was nothing about, uh, priming girls for leadership. And in
Mhm.
fact, in school, we were given home economics classes and typing, stenography was still a thing. And there
Uh-huh.
was nothing about helping girls to raise their voices. And in fact, as a young girl, I don't know, I guess I was very shy, but I had this inner spark. And I ended up becoming the first girl in my neighborhood to have a paper route. And
Oh,
it
love that.
was really intimidating, Mary. I mean, it took a lot. I don't know where I got the strength because every day I'd have to go down into this basement, which was filled with boys and adults, male adults, who would give you your papers for the day. And I was scared to death. I don't think I
Mhm.
showed it on the outside, but I really, like, my stomach was just in knots.
Yeah.
So
But Julie, I'm curious. Did you did you find that other girls paid attention to what you were doing? Do you think it helped plant a seed for
everybody
your
paid
futures?
attention,
Yeah.
Mary, when every time that, this was in the 1970s. So every time I would deliver a paper or, ring the bell to get the fee for the week, people would come out saying, "Go Women's Lib." I mean, it was hilarious.
Yes.
And people, I
Yes.
got bigger tips because of it. I brought in some of my girlfriends to help me at times. If I was going on vacation or I was sick, I would have them sub for me. And so they got a taste of it too. Um,
Yeah.
but it was really not easy. And I mean, luckily, my parents encouraged me. My father sometimes accompanied me to pick
Mhm.
up the papers because of the the situation I was walking into. But wow, I wish I had learned about that in school.
Well, so there's two things you mentioned that I think are important to kind of come back to. The first one is this idea of growing the next generation of leaders. It doesn't stop just with the girls that you grow. That there's a kind of spider webbing that starts to happen where one girl
Oh,
just like you takes a leap to do something and somebody else watches. And in a snowball is probably the better word, but we have an interesting opportunity to start planting seeds and allowing that snowball to grow and to
oh,
form. The other thing
I
you
just think it's
mentioned,
brilliant.
yes. Well, the other thing you mentioned was how you wish you had this as a child. One of the kind of core fundamental components of our camp is that we bring mentors in to work with these girls. So we always have small groups of girls working together. And the mentors we choose are college age girls. And it creates a bit more connection with the campers to have the college age there. But every single one of those mentors says, I wish this camp was around when I was younger. And you're talking about maybe a 10-year
Right,
difference between these
right.
girls in camp. So it shows that there is still such a massive need to expose young girls and young women to these type of opportunities.
I mean, I know that when you provide girls with the opportunity to raise their voice, to learn how to raise their voice in the right way, so that they know that they should be heard and that they are valuable and they have something to share, it's kind of life changing. You
Mhm.
know, I had another story that I'll share with you when I was in college. Um, my dream in life, and I'm a born and bred New Yorker. My dream in life was to become a fashion editor. So New
Mhm.
York being the hub of the fashion business and all the fashion magazines were here. That's what I wanted to do. And in my college, they didn't really have a robust internship program, but I knew as a kid, I just knew that I had to get this internship. And I was nobody. My father was not socially connected. A lot of the interns at these magazines came from very wealthy families whose parents were hobnobbing with the publisher. And I just put my name in there and I didn't give up. I did not give up on pursuing it. And finally, I got my internship. It was at 17 magazine, and that was my launching pad, and I was scared to death. I'm not gonna say I wasn't. I just pushed through that fear somehow.
Yeah.
And again, I did have some parental support, but basically, I got that for myself, and I even got put down about it in college. My professor
Yeah.
didn't wanna give me credit for the internship, didn't think it was important, and yet, I don't know, somehow I persevered.
Well, you know what, I'd credit a lot of that back to your experience in youth. And a lot of research says that women's desire and ability to lead and to feel like they have this the confidence to be able to lead starts with experiences that they had in youth. And they can be small singular experiences, as small as a conversation with a teacher that encouraged them to try something they didn't think they could do, to spending a week at a summer camp, to taking on a job that seemed like it
Right,
wasn't
even
possible at the
babysitting,
time.
or there are so many things that
Yes.
kids can do now. What about decision making? As how should we teach girls to make their own decisions, and why is that important?
You know, there's a couple things. I'm going to tie this back into the concept of authenticity. We are finding, and when I say we, I'll say research is finding. There was a really interesting article that was published by Harvard Business Journal not long ago that talked about these leadership skills that women demonstrate that are very authentic to women actually are being rated by their peers as more valuable than some of the ones that are thought of as more traditional towards men. And I don't mean that as a comparison conversation, but simply a celebration that we all bring unique skills to the table. And I think there is a deep drive for women now in their adulthood to be celebrated for those unique skills. But that translates all the way down to middle schoolers. And I think one of the easiest things that we can all do as the adults that surround these middle school age girls is to celebrate their decision making process. That if they want to put themselves out there as the leader of a student council operation or to create some sort of campaign at their school, let's celebrate that. But if they choose to also be that voice that is quieter,
Mhm.
that simply encourages other people by showing up, by cheering for them, then we should also celebrate that
Or
too.
they could have a support function in
Yeah.
some kind of activity. I agree with you.
Yeah.
You have to be honest with who the girl is, right? You have to be real about it.
Yes. Yes. And I do think oftentimes we push when we come up with the idea of decision making or watching how girls show up, we push girls by saying, "Hey, go be confident and take on XYZ." And for some girls, there's an opportunity to celebrate when she confidently says, "That's not for me," or "I'm going to sit this
Oh,
one out," or "I'm going to let you take the lead because this isn't for me." And, you know, I think about the idea of extroversion and introversion. And I think sometimes we confuse confidence with extroversion. And we confuse a lack of confidence with
Right.
introversion. So the girl that chooses to sit back and observe, and she could be wildly confident and just have said, I made the decision that that one's not for
Right,
me.
because she knows herself and what she's comfortable with or capable of.
Yeah, yeah. And so as a parent, I mean, for me personally, and then also even the way that we design the curriculum for Madam President Camp is to celebrate that each girl can show up as a leader in a way that is authentic to her, and that we don't have to build this one size fits all, leadership ideal for girls. And that's what can help boost their confidence.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, we have a culture in America of for girls to be perfect at everything and successful at everything, but that's just not real.
Right.
And it's
Right.
very harmful, actually. Um, so, I was reading this statistic that at age 8 is where a girl's confidence level can plummet. And that was a little shocking to me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that statistic is one of the big reasons that we really at Madam President Camp that we really made that intentional decision to focus on middle schoolers. So the full statistic actually talks about the age 8 through the age of 14, that there is about a 30% dip in confidence. And there's a small dip in boys' confidence as well, but it is dramatic in girls. And if you play that out into adulthood, our self-rated confidence does not equal that of a man's self-rated confidence until we're about 40 years old.
Wow.
And that's, you think about a dip happening at the age of 8 and it not climbing back up to where it should have been all along until the age of 40.
That is just
I mean,
crazy to me, and I guess it kind of occurs before puberty and during, right?
mhm.
The early teen
Yeah,
years.
there's
Wow.
there's a moment where girls begin to stop seeing the world through their own eyes and start seeing themselves through the world's eyes and becoming aware of how other people start to see them. And that's that age 8. That's where that shift starts to begin.
I don't know if you deal with, how girls see other girls in social media and the
Mm.
role that that plays, but I'd love to get your perspectives on that because, I mean, young kids have phones. They have
Yeah.
smartphones, and they're seeing this on Instagram or wherever they
Yeah.
are, whatever platform they're on.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that we say young kids because I do think that social media epidemic is that hits us at all ages of life. And I'm certainly not in any way, shape, or form an expert on the impact of social media on girls, but it is conversation that we bring up. And oftentimes we allow the girls. We have one of our themes is about communication, and we talk about how social media is an avenue for how communication occurs, both peer to peer and individual to the world. That back and forth communication. And what's really interesting about this is the girls can very clearly voice that they understand what social media
Hmm.
portrays as not real. They get it. They actually, and I don't mean to generalize, but in what I have observed in these conversations, they understand that what they see is not real. But that doesn't remove the fact that it is attempting to try and figure out how to
Yeah, and it
fit
does
in.
kind of bleed into your
Mhm.
consciousness, right? You can't help it.
Yep, yep, it absolutely does. What I do think is interesting on a lot of these studies about confidence is there were studies that were done in the early 90s, and there were studies that were done very recently. And that data, that decrease has actually been consistent over the last 20 to 30 years. So this dip is not just a social media or a current state challenge. This is actually something that has been with us for a very long time.
Right, right. Wow. Just wow. So, how do girls find out about Madam President Camp?
Mhm.
And what are some of the activities, or like what's a typical day like in the camp? And how often
Yeah,
do they run?
we have multiple camps throughout the summer. So right now, we have scheduled for summer 2024. This is the crazy part, is you got to start all of this now because registration has to open here in about a week. We have 4 camps planned for around the greater Kansas City area. So for kind of your worldwide audience, that's smack dab right there in the middle. And then we, just like we've done in the past, are going to also be working with the Quorum Initiative group based out of St. Joseph, Missouri, which is about an hour outside of Kansas City. They once again are going to bring this camp into the St. Joseph community, which is, I'm just grateful for the connections that the Quorum Initiative has helped make there, because that's really been a huge catalyst for expansion. So I digress there,
Fabulous.
but I want to celebrate the impact that this group has had. So our camp is centered around 5 themes: leadership, civic engagement, activism, communication, and self-discovery. And each of those themes corresponds with a day of camp. And we have a variety of lessons that the girls follow, that our campers follow. And they also have a really beautiful journal that helps guide them through the week, and they can make notes to themselves. There's self-discovery quizzes. Takes me back to 17 magazine and doing all those quizzes back then. And then for each lesson, we also have kind of a get up and move activity, because this age group, while they love to really be brought into the conversation as adults, they still are children, and they want to be able to play and be silly. And we want to make sure we celebrate that. Yeah. One of the coolest components where you see that leadership and civic engagement concept come together is the girls work with their peers, their other campers, and they identify an area of activism that they are passionate about. And they fall into a handful of categories. We give them very loose categories to work from: diversity, animal rights, education, and women's rights. And they narrow it down to something that they feel like they can change. And they work throughout the week to do research, to build a presentation, to identify their action plan for becoming activists in this area. And Friday, our last day, they present out to their peers on what they want to do and the change they want to see and why it's so important. And it's a really interesting practice scenario for what it might feel like to go sit down with the principal of their school and talk about the dress code, or the librarian and talk about banned books, or whatever these different topics are that are so near and dear to their heart. But it's an opportunity to practice what that feels like. That's really cool to watch.
Mary, that is so cool. And you know what? It actually reminds me so much of the Quorum Initiative's How Forum that we just had, that you spoke at. You led a workshop for us, because it's one thing to get information about creating change, but it's another thing to actually implement it and make an action plan for yourself and take those next steps, because that could be fear-inducing.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what's really fascinating about the topics, these activism topics that are chosen, is they're the kind of topics that I think sometimes adults think are no big deal. And for these girls, for these campers, it is sending such a clear message that as young women, they have to play in a certain space. And I use the example of dress code because it's very simple. Right. Every single camp that I've witnessed over, the last 3 to 4 years. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about several camps. There has always been a group where their area of activism was changing the dress code. And they will stand up and share their own experience, either having to cover themselves because they were a distraction to the boys, to having to go buy special clothes,
like a uniform or something,
colors, or even just in the gym, they have to wear dark colored shirts. They can't wear light colored shirts. And what they hear is, because you're a girl, we have to treat you differently than we do the boys. And so there are these messages that sometimes we think are harmless and that adults have good reason for putting into place. And yet this age group sees it as something
they pick it up. They pick it up.
They hear the message in a different way. And we really do. We just want them to be aware of that and understand that their thoughts on these matters really are important and deserve to be heard.
That's fantastic. Do girls travel in from other parts of the country, or is the Madam President Camp program mainly for girls in the immediate area?
We have had some girls travel in only for those. It's not an overnight camp. So that's one of the limiting factors.
I
We have
see.
some that have
Okay.
come in that have
Okay.
had family and they've stayed. But I'm glad that you bring that up, because what we've learned through that opportunity of bringing it to St. Joseph, Missouri, and even that's an hour outside of Kansas City, it can be led independently of this kind of Kansas City hub. So we are certainly open to exploring opportunities to bring the curriculum into cities across the country. Our main goal is to make sure that we are impacting as many campers as we can
Hmm.
with this knowledge that they really do have the ability to be leaders to create change.
Yeah, I think this is so exciting. And hopeful.
Yeah.
I love reading about the progress that girls are making in the STEM fields as well. How, there's been a lot more cultural encouragement around girls pursuing math and their interest in math or science or
Mhm.
engineering.
Yeah, yeah. I do think, my personal anecdote that I will share is my oldest daughter attending a Lego camp, and she was the only girl, which just, it kind of struck me that, like, oh,
Yeah.
why? So I have moments like that where I get very encouraged by what the data shows, and also moments where I look around and say, we still have a lot more opportunity.
Yeah. And
And I think
actually
that's what
Lego
conversations like
does
this.
have a lot of, girl
Yes.
Lego pieces and sets. But it shouldn't matter, right?
Right, right. But I think that's why these type of conversations are so important, is to continue to celebrate the need and raise awareness to what solutions could be.
So if we're not in the Kansas City area, what can all of the members of the Quorum Initiative do to empower girls who we know or come into contact with?
One of the number one ways that research says we can encourage this age group, these girls, is through encouraging risk taking. And I'll caveat that a little bit, because risk can feel scary and people
Oh
can hear
yeah.
the word risk and it can go down the path of getting into trouble. But I think there are small risks that we can encourage girls to take. And some of those are things like standing up for yourself or for a friend at school, having a conversation with a teacher about something that they're experiencing in the classroom that they think needs to be
Yeah.
heard, celebrating somebody else while they're playing a new sport that they hadn't done before. And the reason I mention all of that is because there is evidence that when girls take risks, their confidence increases. And yes, sometimes the risks are not successful, but they don't have the opportunity to be successful if they don't step into those risks in the first place. So growing
That's a
that
learning
confidence is
experience in the
huge.
making too.
Yes. Yeah. So I think all of us that know young girls, that interact with young girls, or have the opportunity to kind of push that, that's something that we can be doing every single day.
Mary, this has been such a great conversation. I want to thank you for enlightening all of us about Madam President Camp and how it's really empowering girls to think differently and getting ready, getting them prepared,
Yeah.
right, with the skills they need to make it in their careers, and to head up to that C-suite eventually.
Yes.
I'm also thrilled about the work that Madam President Camp will be doing with the Quorum Initiative, and I look forward to hearing more about that. So how can people get in touch with you, Mary?
Couple ways. So Madam President Camp in general, website scrolling on the bottom there, madampresidentcamp.org. I can be reached either through my Madam President Camp email, which is Mary at Madam President Camp, or you are welcome to engage with me through any of my business
How about LinkedIn?
sites. Yes, LinkedIn, Mary Messner, and also Madam President Camp. Both of us are on LinkedIn. Also, the same thing over on Instagram as well. We'd love to hear from
That's
you.
great. That's great. Well, thanks for sharing the story today and for you making the time to be on Quorum Live. I'll see you next
Thank
time
you.
for another episode of Quorum Live.